But we're gonna have one more presentation this evening. That was going to be the riparian buffer talk, but we swapped that around for windbreaks. So we have from the National Agroforestry Center in Lincoln, Nebraska, Rich Straight is going to speak with us about windbreaks, and let's give him our attention because we only have to focus on one more talk, and then we're free. And I think he's going to buy drinks for everybody at the Flatbread Brewery.
No, that's not what I said. That's not what I said. That's not what I said. I said the last person in the room buys a round.
Oh, I misinterpreted.
Yeah, I'll bet you did. Yeah. You know, when Mike told me I was the last speaker of the day, I've been the last speaker before lunch, and you've heard that phrase, right? I'm the only thing that stands between you and lunch, right? Agroforestry brings a lot of things to a new level. This is a new level I have not experienced before. I am the only thing that stands between you and beer. This is an unsettling thought, and I hope they can edit that out. So, with that, I think, I don't know, we'll see where it goes. Hopefully the pictures will keep me out of trouble. And so, what to expect? See, I've been listening. Definition, right? We're going to start with definition. Then we're going to talk a little bit a very abridged history of windbreaks, and then we want to talk about some of what we know. Okay, and windbreaks is I got the PUD presentation because Shabu talking about alley cropping. Seriously, there are so many questions and there's so much information, and all of you had also many questions. Windbreaks we've been doing for quite a while. We know quite a bit, and I want to encourage you to know it yourself, and I'll get into that a little bit. Then I want to talk a little bit something about what we think we know or we'd like to know more about, and then we're going to have time for some discussion. And so that's kind of the direction we're going for the next 3.5 hours. So if I'm buying beer, baby, you guys are going to earn it. So okay. So what is a windbreak? It's a barrier on the land surface that obstructs wind flow and alters the flow pattern both upwind, windward, and downwind, leeward, of that barrier. What a sterile definition, but...
Thank you. You wrote that?
Probably. Then you get into plantings of single or multiple rows of vegetation. Feels a little more agroforestry friendly, doesn't it? Trees, shrubs, and grasses. I'm a forester, but I have to admit the grasses could be and are used as a wind barrier that are established for one or more environmental. And here's where I think the guy just told me, don't jump in front of the screen a lot today. And economics, okay? And that's one I think we've also fallen down on and sold this practice short, is on the economic side, and we'll get into that a little bit. So when we talk about barriers, many kinds of barriers, but as much as agroforestry, vegetation, I'm a forester, I'm a tree hugger, I'm a tree cutter, this is a windbreak, okay? It's a cattle fence, cattle gates with fabric. This is a windbreak. It's boards, okay? This is plastic fencing like you put in construction areas on poles. It's a windbreak, okay? As much as it maybe goes against our nature, we have to admit that, because a lot of research comes out of this as well, and our understanding of how these barriers on the surface of the land affect wind flow. So these are windbreaks. Maybe not the kind that we would like to promote, but they're windbreaks. Brief history. Scottish Parliament urged the planting of tree belts to protect agriculture production levy in the mid-1400s, right? And they said in their documentation, because it's been going on for hundreds of years. So this is just one early documentation of a government trying to promote it. So westward expansion of the U.S., we saw homesteaders planting windbreaks because they just couldn't stand the howling of the wind and the dust, and it made a place a little more civil to live and civil for their livestock. Then we lead into the Dust Bowl. Y'all have heard about it. None of us have lived through it in this room. And then, but similarly, as I think Andy said, the Center for Agroforestry Development Center in Saskatchewan they talk about in a similar time frame, the 1930s conquest. It's a little more poetic, you know. But they did a lot of windbreak plantings in the plains of Canada. And so that's some of what kind of led to where we are. And this is before anybody in North America is really using the A word in their vernacular. So that's a little bit of where we came from, and it's no surprise, we won't dwell on it. So what does it mean to break wind? Yeah, see, I knew all you were going to, yeah. So, but it's not this simple. Okay, that's what we've learned. It's not just there's no wind on the leeward side, and the wind gets pushed around and pushed over. It's not that. It's much more complicated than that. So how does the change in the wind speed affect the microclimate? A lot of research on this, and we're not going to go through it all, but basically, if you think about as air moves, it moves from the surface and up and around. That's the vehicle that exchanges all these sorts of things like moisture and temperature and gets it mixed up within the atmosphere. That's the vehicle. And so this net, or this vertical motion of air parcels, brings about the transfer and anything that it's carrying with it. And so we start talking about energy transfer. And it starts getting really sounds like a physics class all of a sudden. But you'll start thinking about windbreaks in this way if you're going to really start thinking about how to use windbreaks in a different way, is understanding how they function, how they work, not just that the wind is slower and it's nicer on the leeward side. So about anything you can measure out there goes from a source where there's a lot of it, high concentration, to a place of low concentration or a sink. And so water vapor and pollen and ozone and carbon dioxide and dust, all these things, right? Because nature reports a vacuum, and nature likes the way physics works, tries to even things out. And so when you have the air mixing, it starts to even this stuff out. So these are just some of the things we think about. So when you start changing the water vapor and where the vapor, the moisture in the air is residing, you start affecting things like relative humidity. And when you start talking about ozone and carbon dioxide and mixings and how plants grow, because they respond to carbon dioxide levels, right? And how big the leaf area is and things like that. We start talking about heat. Is it warmer or cooler? We saw on the civil pasture, because those trees are affecting airflow, that we saw grasses, the cool season grasses started growing a little bit earlier in the spring, and they grew more later into the summer. That's a heat thing going on. That's why wildlife like to be under trees, because they don't lose as much body heat because they have that canopy. So all these things are important to understand what's going on when we slow the wind down. It's not just, it doesn't blow my hat off like it used to. So particulate matter gets deposited when the wind slows down. It's just fluid dynamics, you know. It can't carry as much stuff, just like water. Windbreaks, they physically trap stuff, they filter it. Okay? And we have that sense when we talk about riparian forest buffers and filter strips, but air gets filtered also. We don't understand everything about it. Sometimes I think we don't understand much about that, but we know it happens. And then some of these chemicals that are absorbed to the particulate matter, very similarly to the stuff that's bound to the soil particles, get trapped in our riparian buffers. And then all these things combine to alter the microclimate, and that's defined as something smaller than the climate. You know, hey, I'm a forester and I'm a guy. I keep things simple. Okay? So, and you've seen curves like this. Okay? There's a series of, I don't know, it's 11 or 12 on this windbreak series that NRCS did with the University of Nebraska, and talks about, and you'll see these sorts of things. And this is the location of your barrier, and this is the windward side, this is the leeward side, and these are general trends. Okay, that's not 100% all the time everywhere. These are general trends that we see happen, and that we can start. So then how do crops respond to this? How do livestock respond to this? How do wildlife species respond to this? What happens? And some of this is soil. Yeah, there we go, soil. So it's not just the above ground stuff. You can look all this stuff up. The other thing that we've been trying to get a handle on is windbreaks exist in a three-dimensional realm. And Thank you. I'm a master of the obvious. But that means a lot when we're talking about how air moves through a windbreak. If you just have a slatted fence in these gaps, some air gets through, some air doesn't. Okay. But when you realize it's a vegetation, this is a top, looking down on top of a artist's rendition of a windbreak.
Landscape architecture.
A landscape architect's rendition of a windbreak from an aerial view. There is no such thing as a 100% dense windbreak, vegetative windbreak. There's always space for air to move through that. Sometimes in a very circuitous route, but it will move through that. And so we don't have to worry about 100% like a solid brick wall. So some of that air is going to move through that, and that's actually a good thing. It's actually a really good thing. If you think about the nice little blue lines, that's your wind moving in an unobstructed fashion across the landscape. But as it approaches, this is the end view of our windbreak. We just show one tree so it doesn't clutter it up. You start getting turbulence. As these turbulence keep being pushed into the tree, they continue to get broke up into smaller and smaller eddies, turbulence. These, think of these as vector quantities, I said it's physics. They don't have as much energy as these great big eddies. They can't do as much movement of stuff, transfer of energy. They don't have as much energy to impart upon the system. And so we get less mixing of the air. We get less dilution of water vapor. We get less mixing of air and transfer of heat. So that's, if you start thinking about this, you start getting an understanding of how these windbreaks work. So, because I don't know how to put a video into a PowerPoint. We at the Agroforestry Center about 10 years ago wanted to film the wind, right? You've heard of capture the wind and all those sorts of things. We wanted to film the wind.
Inherit the wind.
What's that? What?
Inherit the wind.
Inherit the wind. No, capture the wind. Okay. Gone with the wind. Wind is great stuff. So I'm going to narrate. We got some neat orange smoke bombs. Could you dim the light for me any more? And you can see this. This smoke is just flying across the top. It's about 12 to 15 gusts up to 20 mile an hour wind. Great, but look at this. See this starting to come through here just a little bit? It just kind of oozes through. Isn't that cool? And this is going to the top, just going. And now on the other side, I wish I could show you, but I don't know how to manipulate video that well. You can see the turbulence of the smoke as it approaches the windbreak, getting all mixed up. So you have now at least two different masses of air. And they become laminar flow. So guess what? This slow-moving air doesn't let that fast-moving air come down and mix the air around your crops or your livestock or your living snow fence. So this is good to have this moving through here, right? Huh? A little air is a good thing. But isn't that cool? You can see what's going on. This is was it 3 rows or 2 rows of cedar?
I think it was 3.
I think it was 3. And most people say, that's dense, that's 100% dense. Well, no, it's not. You all know that. There's no such thing as a 100% dense vegetative barrier. I'm now wasting time waiting to get to the next section of the video. Because this whole thing's about 5 minutes long, but I think it'll help you see what's going on here. And there we go, anemometers, physics. This is 3H, height of the windbreak, upwind, windward side. And I know, it's jumping around because it's windy. And I can't crop video very well. But you can see, this is Forrester's videoing. It's about 10, 12 miles an hour. 1H, it's not quite, it's not up to 12, 15. It's down under 10 or close to 10. As we get close to the windbreak, because you're starting to get some eddies, it's not unobstructed flow. And it's spinning. With the audio, it's great. You can hear the wind gusts and everything else. Okay. So you can see it's slower. Even on the windward side, there is an impact. Right next to the trees. See that? This gizmo can't measure it. Now, it'd be nice to have everything there, but we know that that's a really small place right next to the barrier. In fact, there are some reasons you don't want to be next to the barrier, because remember what happens when wind slows down? It dumps dirt and it dumps snow. You don't always want to be there. So 2H, that is height of the windbreak times 2, a weight downwind or leeward side of the windbreak, and we're measuring something. When it gets gusts, it gets up to like 7 or something. 2 to 4H, 2 to 5H, that's a nice place to be. If you're a cow in the winter or a house, get out there a little ways. We're not going to dump. 5H, 5 times the height. It was real slow right when we turned the camera on. That's right. My car makes this noise. Take the mechanic, it doesn't make the noise. But finally, it gusts up here a little bit. There we go, because we got the camera on it and the anemometer wanted to show off. And it starts gusting up to 10 or 12 miles an hour again at 5H. Okay, so there's some impact, but not as much. And we're going to go to 10H here pretty quickly, I think. Pretty quick.
Is this available on YouTube?
We have an edited version I'm working on, but it was made with an older technology, and I'm trying to clean it up so we can make it available. Yeah, and it's better than this one. And it doesn't have me narrating. So this is 10H, and you can see that anemometer's clicking right along again, which is the stuff that you read about, sometimes you need to get out there and check it out for yourself. Don't just trust that it was done by the University of Nebraska, Jim Brandl research. Okay, I guess that's what I'm trying to say is get out there and do some of this stuff. Buy some smoke bombs. Take it out there with demonstration sites. Contact the fire people. Let them know you're going to be making smoke. We did. Even though it was orange, we did. Okay, but do that. That's how you learn on stuff. Was it Alex Shigo always said, touch trees? You know, because you learn more about how trees respond to injury and wounds and pruning. If you get out and touch trees. And well, I'm saying the same thing. You need some of this hands-on so you really believe it and you live it, which is why I'm really excited that we have producers in this group. They know so much more about stuff than I do. So here in a gap, so this is, gaps are bad, okay? Bernoulli effect or something, physics again. Wind comes through here, and it screams through here. And when you hear the audio, that poor anemometer is straining because the wind actually will be faster in the gap than it will be in the open air, in the open unobstructed field. Which means if you try and plant a new tree in that gap to get it up and running again, to fill in the gap, that's a really bad place to live, is in the gap. Come on. Video intermission's over.
So how do you go about filling the gap?
You don't let them get started.
Okay.
That's one way. The other way then would be, well, maybe you have to create an artificial barrier upwind to slow the wind down, to trap the snow so it doesn't crush that new plant. And so you have to do some other barrier upwind to allow something to grow, and you create a nice microclimate in the gap. And so that's, retrofitting is always more expensive, right, than building it right the first time. So don't let gaps get started. It's people like Xinhua, this sums it up really nicely, I think. It's people like Xinhua who did this analysis on three-dimensional space of wind moving through windbreak that I'm glad there are people who do this sort of work, just like I'm glad there are people who teach 7th graders. So I don't have to. Okay, but he analyzes this and he gives comment on the so what part of it. So there's research to back this up. So I'm going to need to move along here. So we've modified the microclimate. So what? Some vegetable crops. Here are some responses of vegetable crops to the impact of wind protection. And we have greater yield, we have longer vines, earlier flowering, reduced vine damage, greater yields, reduced bacterial spot. These are some of the things that have been documented. Not everything, just give you an idea, it's generally pretty good, okay? Fruit response to wind protection. Improved quality of fruit. If you're selling fruit, quality and appearance is everything. And what did Dan Shepard talk about? One little weevil maggot, one little weevil in the bag, think the world's ending. So improve yield of marketable fruit. Marketable fruit has a higher value than juice fruit, okay? That means money. So these are some responses of fruit. Increase crop production. So there's something in the neighborhood of, oh, I thought I put it on here. There's like 109 years worth of crop yield response to windbreaks from all around the world, summarized in one little table. And yeah, is this the same for every county and every soil and every place? No, but it gives you an idea. Generally speaking, it's fairly positive. The question we're getting now is, do these relationships still hold with the newer hybrids that are drought-tolerant hybrids? I don't know. Do these things are mostly done in the 60s and maybe some in the 70s or 50s, 60s, and 70s. Do these relationships on crop yield response hold with minimum till? I don't know. So we've got a group of folks in the Great Plains who are starting to ask that question, and we're working with some universities and NRCS and state forestry agencies, and we're trying to make this happen to do some analysis to see does this trend still hold even with these new farming systems. Some of the newer research coming out of the University of Nebraska suggests that yes, good, strong, vibrant hybrids respond even better to wind protection than do the old pre-hybrid type grains. So, livestock. We heard a lot about heat stress, but there's also cold stress on livestock. You've got a copy of this. I'm not going to go through it, but basically, these are bigger animals on this side of the table than that side. The critical temperature that's the critical temperature at which cattle start experiencing stress, whether they are a type of cattle. These are all beef cattle, or cows. Some could be dairy. Summer coat, fall coat, heavy winter coat, and then their percent decrease of feed efficiency per degree of cold. In other words, the colder they are, they got to eat more feed just to maintain. Remember we heard that talking earlier in one presentation with heat stress, is maintaining versus gaining. And I think that was related, Mark was talking about goats, right? Lambs, goats, kids. And so similar folks, that table he had of the 72-degree thing, well, here's the thing on the cold side. And so we can see when livestock, this zone 1, little danger, start paying attention. This is bad news for cattle. Windbreaks, right? Wind chill, you've all heard about wind chill, right? If you live in the Midwest, meteorologists love wind chill. Okay, they love heat index, they love wind chill because they can make news out of it. But it's real if you're a cow, okay? So, when designing windbreaks, we're not going to get into it. These are the things that you can affect in the design of a windbreak, okay? And these different criteria are going to vary in their combinations depending on what you want the windbreak to do. One design does not do everything. I'm going to move pretty quickly, so because you can look this stuff up. Height, big factor. It affects how large an area or how far downwind from the wind barrier do you experience these microclimate changes. The taller the windbreak, the greater distance downwind. Density. Density affects how that reduction in wind speed, how far it carries and how it carries downwind. Basically, really, really dense windbreaks give you a greater reduction, initial reduction on the downside of the windbreak, but they come back to kind of full speed much more quickly. And at some point, you don't get any benefit when it's too porous, the opposite of density. So you can look this stuff up, so you can affect it. Different windbreaks have different densities for different purposes. These are just some pictures, because I'm a guy and I like pictures. So, orientation, how you orient the windbreak to what wind? When wind, okay? Not all wind is created equal. So we talk about the troublesome wind, for lack of a better term, and are you trying to protect in the spring or the winter or the fall or the summer? Which direction does the wind come from? Well, you can look that up. There's a website. Just that. And you can look up these things called wind rows. It's because it's round like a flower, and that's why it's a rose. And so this tells you the magnitude and frequency of winds of this strength. Okay, so different colors are different strengths of wind, and you can take the difference in these percentage lines. That's 2% right there, and you get an idea of how often the wind comes from that direction. And so in April, and they do these by month, in Columbia, Missouri, in April, the predominant wind is out of the south. And if you live here, this should not be a surprise to you. Okay. So in 2 weeks, I'm doing a windbreak training in Billings, Montana. This is crazy, folks. Look at that. You could take any one of these charts and you can stick it in there and it looks just the same. It doesn't change across the seasons, right? So you're in Iowa in the wintertime. What wind direction predominantly?
Northwest.
Northwest. And in the summer, it's the
Southwest.
okay. Billings. You'd want to know this. In fact, when we go up there to look at designing living snow fences, they're on the wrong side of the road. They put their living snow fences on the south side of the road to trap the snow so it doesn't blow across the road. In Iowa and Missouri and Illinois and Wisconsin, which side of the road do we put the windbreaks, the living snow fences on? Thank you. Right, so it's good to know this stuff. The length of the windbreak, we can control that, right? We're planning it. We can make it as long as we want. It needs to be longer, wider than the area you're trying to protect. Significantly so, because the wind curls around here. And we have documentation on that. These are things you can pick. So by manipulating these criteria, we can come up with field windbreaks to protect crops, protect soil, trap snow, enhance crop production. This is a wind barrier. I know there's no trees in it, but it's a wind barrier, trust me, windbreak. And farmstead. So we can manipulate for all these different types of purposes. And for livestock, whether it's wind or snow trapping, whether it's just wind and cold during calving time, or where it might be, so we can design these windbreaks for different purposes. I know, and you know, farmstead windbreaks are not an agroforestry practice. But if you're involved in windbreaks and you're working with producers, you got to know this stuff, because you're not going to just say, well, that's not agroforestry. Your credibility is going to go downhill really quickly. Excuse me. Snow management. Sometimes we want to trap the snow, living snow fences. Sometimes we want to disperse the snow and collect it across the field to collect moisture for the field. And they do more of this up north, Dakotas and up into Saskatchewan and that area. So we can manipulate this. Most of us have our experience with designing windbreaks. This is my opinion. I have no survey from the Field Office Tech Guide. Right? NRCS has the Field Office Tech Guide, technical guide. And in particular, most people don't know what in the blue blazes is in sections 1, 2, 3, or 5. They do know the practice standards. It's as good as far as it goes, because you have to remember these are technical standards for minimum standards that we're going to invest public dollars on to achieve a specified result. It's good, it's a nice place to start. It's somebody else's synthesis of all this other research stuff that's out there. I encourage you to go beyond the minimum standards. You have to work with this. Programs lean on this stuff. They are guides. They're not, it doesn't say FOTB, Field Office Technical Bible. It says Technical Guide. Sometimes it's hard to argue. So, where can you get information? You can go to, there was a whole conference, a couple of them, on windbreaks. There's a book, Windbreak Technology. I think if you have or associated with the university, you can go on some of these websites where you can track down publications and journals and things. It's a whole book on windbreaks.
Yeah, that is available chapter by chapter online.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Not on our website, but it could be. Well, no, it can't either be. But it's on Elsevier. You can look at it later. Don't take it, please. NRCS has worked, and they have, you think you got a thick notebook. This is just on windbreaks. It's a national windbreak technology notebook. We would like to update it and make it current and streamlined, electronic and digital and social media and all that neat stuff. But stuff's out there that can be used. If you want to do windbreak training, we got stuff. As long as we're talking about books and stuff, there's the old green North American Agroforestry, and then there's the new one, North American Agroforestry. There's the resources. There's New Vistas in Agroforestry, and there are 3 of these now, or 2. They come out through Advances in Agroforestry books. So there are references out there. And if you just want to broaden your horizons, the overstory. You can get this stuff online. This is mostly tropical, but you'll see some temperate stuff in there. And this happens to be the compilation. You can get all of the articles free online. We were working with folks, and we saw somebody brought something to our attention. We said, that's a neat idea. It's a clipboard. It's clear, and it's hollow. So we created we being us with NRCS and a bunch of other partners, a little PowerPoint, 2 slides that that you can have. It's on our website, and you can take and customize it. But basically, it's a 10-step kind of field reminder sheet if you're designing a windbreak of the things you ought to be thinking about, things you ought to be considering in designing a windbreak. Stick it inside the clear notebook, your cheat sheet. It's your crib sheet in the field, and you've got some of those things to remind you on the things to ask the landowner producers. And guess what? Yours for this day only, or this week only. We have a box of these clear clipboards over here with copies of the clip. I know. It's public dollars. It's public dollars. Trust me.
It's almost like Oprah.
It's almost, yeah.
Comes with a coupon for free beer, right?
No, because the public dollars ain't buying you beer, folks. So that's good that you applauded. So anyway, and you can take it tomorrow in the field, and you can have a clipboard to take with you if you want to put stuff on. So, but those tools are out there. You can customize those. We developed one of those for silvopasture, and it's silvopasture is a lot more complicated, but again, it's kind of a hit list taking in the field, and you can download that PowerPoint on the National Ag Forestry Center website. So there are references. Use them. Get copies of them. Don't use your government money to buy them, because then when you take another position, you have to leave it at the office behind you. Invest a little bit of your own so you can take that stuff with you. Brush up your Shakespeare, right? How many times have you heard this book referenced today? That's available. It's a scanned copy. It's kind of tough to read, but the Library of Congress has scanned this, and it's PDF. I've got it. If you want it, let me know. I'll get it to you, of that book. And it's legal because the Library of Congress said, please distribute widely. Okay. You can also still buy it in various versions. This is that Scottish report, Shelterbelt and Microclimate. This is on the National Ag Forestry Center website. It's some of this old technology, and so but it gives you some good wealth of background to understand things. And that's chapter by chapter. You can download it, PDF. Here's another one. Wendell Berry, who in the later version of this wrote the introduction to tree crops, but Wendell Berry's written much on natural resources in America, The Unsettling of American Culture and Agriculture. Interesting book, suggesting that you do more than lean on the field office tech guy, because we're getting people asking about food and fiber and fuel and food, fiber, fuel, energy, noise, irrigation efficiency, dust collection, animal confinement, odor. And we don't have as much information about those, but as you understand them, you can work with landowners to help design them. And where I think we have, this is on the economics, where I think we've really fallen down is we've been focusing most of our time and energy on the economics of wind protecting soil, wind protecting crops, wind protecting livestock, and how much money it can save. But we haven't been talking about windbreaks producing a product, not nearly as much. And we started talking about the forest farming and under the orchard condition. Was Aaron brought that up, right? What about if you had a wider windbreak or an existing windbreak and you start growing stuff under the canopy of existing windbreak? What if you start growing fruits and nuts and berries as part of the windbreak, or woody decorative florals as part of the windbreak? So it's producing some income, and it's less likely to be viewed by the landowner as non-productive ground that I got to pay taxes on, and it's providing some income. I've asked a couple landowners if they would consider renting their riparian forest buffer or their windbreak to a third-party person who could raise non-timber forest products on it. Most of the landowners I've talked to on unofficial survey have said, no, I'm not really interested in that. Although they cash ran their stuff. But a few of them have said, yeah, I'm not sure what that agreement would look like, but yeah. So these are some things that if we start understanding how windbreaks work, because we can do this badly as well. You can dump snow in, and the snow will just strip the branches off your neat little cherry bush or something, or your hazelnut bush if you don't do it well. The stuff to think about. Yes, that's my grandson. Thanks for asking. Stuff to think about. Biomass. We heard Shabu talk about biomass. But what about, how do you produce biomass in a windbreak and still leave the windbreak there to break the wind? And so here's a research paper that was done. Some folks, Jim Brandl and Xinghua and Michelle in our office in Tala at the University of Nebraska, and they're researching trees, and they find trees grown in open spaces grow differently than trees in forests. Now, all of you are going, duh. Okay, but in what way? Where is the biomass located? How is it structured? Can you grow good quality timber trees in a windbreak? It's kind of tougher. But how much biomass is there and how do you harvest it and how you... So there's certain people in John Court up in Canada is doing similar work. And I know there are others. That's an issue. Windbreaks. We did a survey. No, I take that back. We can't do surveys. The Association of Natural Resources Conservation and Development Districts did a survey. We just happened to help them synthesize the information about windbreaks. And every time I show this slide, I actually get a little giddy. One of the primary reasons they thought people planted windbreaks. Wind. But you know what?
Something was definitely wrong.
What were the other 2 out of 10?
Yeah, but I'll tell you what though, it was usually in the top 2 for all the agroforestry practices. Wildlife was number 1 or number 2 on perceptions of why agroforestry practices were planted. Now, did they make money on it? No, but that's part of the sociology, part of the decision process that landowners go through. We need to know this because I took this picture up in North Dakota, land of the windbreak, just last year. This is, some people call this habitat consolidation. Some people call it rabbitat. These trees used to look like those trees, and they got cut down. Now, it's easy to say $7 corn, $14 beans, but it was happening before $7 corn. Why are producers taking out windbreaks? You heard Dan Shepard talk about that the fertilizer spreaders were always 40 foot wide. Guess what happened? Who came up with 50 foot? Tell me, why did we're not in the metric system? Why would they go 50 foot, right? And all of a sudden, you got muck with this equipment. Maybe that's part of why producers are reluctant to put something as permanent or perceived as permanent as trees on the landscape. So we need to start understanding why the windbreaks are going out if we want people to plant more of them. This whole increased crop production thing I mentioned, we're getting some people are starting to develop a research to look at that. Changing weather, you can call it climate change. We've been talking about weather extremes because not everybody agrees on climate change or its cause, but everybody agrees the weather ain't what it used to be. And in fact, they changed the plant hardiness maps, right? So questions we need to start thinking about and planning ahead for, maybe some research on this, not only diseases and insects moving, but what about the species of trees and shrubs and plants that we are recommending in our agroforestry practices and the crops that they are going to be associated with and those interactions? This stuff's changing. We ought to have this conversation out on a windbreak. Nice mellow windbreak, taking advantage of all the things, remembering all the physics and stuff about height, and that's where we ought to have this conversation. But we're not, we're here. And there we go. So that's the end of my presentation because, lights please, we want to talk about whatever's on your mind when it comes to windbreaks. If you want to talk some of the social aspect, you know people are doing research on the social aspect, about the physics, where do you find more information, bad experiences with windbreaks, you can tell those to Andy. So, we have time here for the next, 2.5 hours, right? How long?
We'll give them 10 minutes.
We got 10 minutes. What are your thoughts about windbreaks? What would you like to know you don't know? And some of them may be, well, that exists, and some of them may be, that's a really good question. Yes, sir.
I've always wondered why either Iowa DOT or whatever your state DOT is, they have guys running around in their snow trucks in the winter. Couldn't they GPS those bad spots, and wouldn't that be the perfect spot then, potentially, for a windbreak?
Yeah, and in fact, similar things have been done in Minnesota, North Dakota, have living snow fence programs. They did that in Colorado. Survey in Nebraska did similar things. And you go out and you talk to the people in the field who do the snow removal work, and they go back to the same place and the same place and the same place. You talk to those folks, you don't have to GPS it. They know. When the wind comes up, they go, yep, I'm going down to Jake's Corner. I'll be back in a couple hours.
So DOT, state level DOTs have done some of that?
Some of them have in those states where they've developed in corroboration with state forestry and NRCS, Well, they have a living snow fence program. Some of them have done that, but nobody does it as a matter of course. It's usually when there's been a living snow fence initiative developed for that state that they've done things like that.
Minnesota's probably done
Yes,
most.
Minnesota has.
All right, Joey.
Minnesota is doing that kind of stuff. In fact, right now, I think most of the trucks right now in Minnesota has this APO, automatic. In a way, it tracks down the, the volume of salt applied, its speed, reflected in the wind, all this kind of information is that to understand.
And in fact, they've gone so far as they've contacted some of the real research gurus on snow movement over in Wyoming and worked with them to develop models specific to the type of snowstorms that occur in different parts of Minnesota. I forget how many different areas, regions in Minnesota, they broke it down. And they have online planning design tool for the different part of the state. You can go in and it says, you ought to have, in this area, western, northwest, the wind blows. You need to have a greater setback so you don't end up dumping snow onto the road than you do in southeast Minnesota. And they've worked with them and developed that whole online planning model for Minnesota, the Department of Transportation. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, we do
John?
have that, and it's being developed for online learning.
I wonder about the current situation with respect to, I might not be using the correct term, pivot agriculture.
Center pivot irrigation?
Yeah, irrigation. Yeah. Are windbreaks being used, adapted? What's the situation right now?
They're just being cut down.
It's being cut down.
Slicked off.
Yeah.
Even,
That was it.
you know, because you could make a case for, grass strips and shrub rows and things. And it was mentioned earlier, maybe it was Dan Shepard again, Roundup Ready. And now they're talking about 2,4-D ready. Yeah, so we're seeing under center pivots, the most we can get, it used to be we could only get in the corners. Well, then they start putting those funky little extensions so there's less corner to get. And sometimes we'd get a little something on the curvature where the tangent, geometry, trigonometry, the tangent of the arc and the surveyed square, and they might put some just on the border on the outside edge. Well, that leaves the whole half section. I don't care how tall your trees are, you're not going to protect.
So it's precipitating removal.
Yes. Much of it was done when the pivots really came in early in the 70s. We saw many, many windbreaks, and they're now continuing. And now windbreaks are going out because pivots are being promoted because of the conservation value, that is, they're a more efficient use of water than flood irrigation. So we're seeing, again, a resurgence of more center pivots going in. At least that's my interpretation of it. But is that a comment continuing on
Yeah,
that?
on that, I was talking to this guy who's a New Zealander, pasture dairy guy in the boot heel, and he was on a real sandy center pivot area. He was trying to get short shrubs that would be able to go, provide windbreaks midsection that the center pivot would go over. And he said in some places they've actually made mounds to like lift the entire assembly
Pivot?
up to get a higher windbreak.
And get
So-
more than greater area of protection.
Correct.
Yeah, there've been
I've not checked with him for a couple of years, but that seems like.
And you were going to make a comment also on the irrigation or a different topic?
Well, go ahead. A lot of that was coming out, as you said, in the 70s. One of the things I look at on that from the engineering side of that is, can we improve the efficiency and promote some of that going back in purely by slowing that wind down underneath the center pivot?
Irrigation
There is
efficiency.
this misconception that, oh, the center pivot is so efficient.
Yeah.
When you look at a lot of these guys, and some of the older ones that have got
Yep.
the nozzle up high or in corn ground where it's up above your head, there's still a lot of.
There's some irrigation efficiency to be gained, and it wouldn't take very much research, but I think it's the physical incorporation of the windbreak in that pivot and running up over the shrubs and then the Roundup Ready.
And then
So-
they chemicate.
Oh yeah, and then the chemigation, running various chemicals through the center pivot, depending on what they might be. Often those are more insecticides, but or fertilizer. I don't know about any herbicides really to speak of.
There was a trial, I think it was a research project in western Minnesota with trying a variety of different shrubs to use under center pivots. There was a report issued on that quite a while ago, but similar kind of issues of pivots keep changing. They used to have nozzles up on top, now they have drop nozzles. So it's created a variety of issues of trying to incorporate low profile windbreaks and underneath pivots.
It's a question, you mentioned the cash leases on windbreaks. Have you seen anyone doing this successfully, or do you
No.
have like?
It was just an idea I had,
any
so-
thoughts or recommended contract terms that someone would need to consider?
You know, I haven't had time to really kind of develop that up. It would seem to me it'd be a cash rent sort of thing of just what's the, in simplest terms I could see it, what do you rent that land for cash rent for crops or grazing, depending on what the current land use is. And then say, could I rent it from you on a long-term basis? And then you probably have to have some sort of easement access thing, because I think that's one of the things that farmers are more concerned about is, am I letting somebody traipse across my property anytime they want? And so you'd have to work out some of that easement sort of thing of how often or how much contact you need ahead of time before you access a property. But it strikes me it could be fairly straightforward. But it was just a thought when I've talked to some producer, I just said, hey. So I don't have anything to back it up. No. I know of no example of it. Any other?
One comment, just a comment, that you made the comment about farmstead windbreaks not being agroforestry. How could you turn a farmstead windbreak into an agroforestry practice?
Forest edibles.
Excuse me?
Edibles, forest farm.
Edibles, okay.
Because actually, the idea that Rich was floating as far as the multiple products would probably be more adapted to a farmstead setting where they're close at hand for a landowner, as opposed to one out in the middle of the field.
Jim Chamberlain, not Chamberlain here in the room, but Jim Chamberlain, Virginia, that John Munsell talked about. Is it Munsell or Munsell? Munsell. Okay, that's what I've always said, but I've never asked you. Are you taking credit for that? No. Okay, all right. So it's Jim Chamberlain. One of the things I've heard him say, and he says this because he's talked to landowners, he just says, fewer and fewer people, landowners, are interested in cutting down trees, even when they own woodlands, okay? And so to talk to them about managing the woodland for income, that's not the way they're thinking and looking at their woodlands, but they will consider harvesting these other crops, these non-timber forest products. And so we know there are more and more acreage owners, ranchettes, McMansions, whatever you want to call them. More and more people who are owning these fragmented landscapes, and they don't know what to do with them, a lot of them. When they've been surveyed, they mow. Why? Because they have a mower and they mow. And what's the old comment? You know, if your only tool is a hammer, beat stuff. So it's like that. That's what it said. So I'm thinking of more and more of these, but they want to do right things. They don't want to do bad stuff. And I think that's a group that could have an income on local food, maybe local energy, and helping to protect the ecosystem services, the natural resources, the water, the wildlife habitat. And if it paid, we might actually make some inroads, because people don't have as much heartache cutting down herbaceous stuff, you know, that they do trees. John.
Oh, I just wanted to follow up and say that, you know, what you're saying has a great deal of merit. And I think the research today is demonstrating that there is a growing segment of the landowning population that is very much like what you described, and they have discretionary income, so they're not the conventional farmer in the sense that we typically think of, but they're very interested in alternative practices, and they're willing to experiment and to entertain possibilities that are alternative from some of those conventional approaches. And I think that's a growing population that we need to consider in terms of how we develop outreach with respect to agroforestry, because you know, when Andy talks about 5% of the landscape, I think there's a great deal of opportunity with respect to those landowners that are maybe more experimental and more willing to take some risk, which is a big part of promoting agroforestry.
And we know that woodland ownership is fragmenting, whereas agricultural land ownership is conglomerating. And so we have to start thinking, how do we reach that audience when they get more and more dispersed? There was a comment or question over here, and then I'll get back there. Was just before John. You're on.
Right, and then I'm saying, you know, what you're saying, I would assume people would be so much more comfortable if they had many more living examples. I know someone earlier today mentioned the demonstration sites. If they could have, you know, the proof, the living proof, then, and how a method of how to do these, you know, profitable windbreaks, then I think that would be an excellent place to start.
Yeah, the first tenet of the agroforester is do no harm. You know, No, but seriously, when you work with landowners, that's a really common theme. They don't want to do anything bad. You know, they're not land managers. They've moved from a city or community or whatever, and now they own this property, and they don't want to do something bad. They always want a pond. They want a place for the kids. They want a place, a barn for their tractor, and they don't want to do anything bad. And so they're asking for help.
And a lot of these sites aren't big enough to really practice silviculture.
Right?
Being a silviculturist, I mean, you can't.
To its edge effect.
I mean, you're not gonna accept the practice of encouraging oak regeneration on your 7 acres.
Right.
They're not gonna do it, so it's the backyard forest, and I think agroforestry is a great way to sell forest conservation
And-
to these landowners.
And Scott Josiah, the state forester in Nebraska, keeps reminding me that it's pretty easy for us in the agroforestry realm to talk with the small landowner, the niche market person, the quaint little mom and pop shop. It's friendly, it feels good. Okay, but maybe we also need to be developing our talking points for the industrial ag. Okay, because it's a different audience and they have different drivers for their decision-making process. And so we don't want to become a one-trick pony. We need to understand different parts of society. Yeah. Was there a comment in the back?
I saw from the chart that there was a yield on alfalfa of 99% increase in 3 years. I was just wondering if you could point me towards that information and where it came from.
That was from an extremely small sample, I think, that's why that number is so high. And I'd have to go back and look to see where the focus source was.
But
That's in the middle of the dairy country, so there's plenty of alfalfa around, I'm sure.
Right.
It'd be a good piece of share.
and I think that the reference might be in here in this.
It would be. Oh, I think it's in the other one.
I'm sorry,
It'd be in there.
somewhere. And I'm going to leave these books here, and you can look at them. Please don't take them. The rest of the publications over there, take as many copies, that's a plural, as you want. Because they don't do any good in my warehouse and in Mike's warehouse. Take as many copies as you want, take them back home, give them to other people. If
The
they,
vegetable one especially has the chart in there on the impacts on fruits and
Right.
vegetables. And the field windbreaks has the yield.
so
Yeah, they do.
I've always said that, but my family is fairly small. I have one daughter and, dad. So, but yeah, go ahead and take those. If you don't take them today, I think they'll be out here all week, right? So, but feel free to take as many copies as you want to give to other people, help them drink the Kool-Aid, whatever it might take. But they're there, and you might as well use them as the best of your ability. So, am I being cut up?
You need more.
And you need more, we can get you more, yeah.
All right, thanks for a lot of really good attention and discussion, et cetera. It's been a very long day. This is the longest sit day. Wednesday's going to be a very long day, but it'll be all in the field and et cetera, so it'll be different. So we'll have coffee and some small munchies at 7:15 tomorrow morning, and we'll start around 8, and we'll be back here. So I'm going to lock this room. When you all leave, you can leave. Any